Moments in life can break a man, but this wasn't just a moment. It was the death of everything Bill Cosby thought he could control. The courtroom was suffocating, the air thick enough to choke on. Cameras clicked, breaths trembled, and then the judge's voice cut through like a blade. Life in prison, without the possibility.
Think about that. Life without parole. In legal terms, that's the system saying, you're never walking out. Not in 10 years, not in 50. The only way out is in a coffin. Harsh, maybe. But for survivors, it was long overdue justice. Do you agree with the judge's decision?
Of parole. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Even the air seemed to pause. Cosby tried to steady himself, but his body betrayed him. His lips quivered, his chest rose in frantic gasps, and the blood drained from his face. Then, as if the weight of his sins crushed him all at once, he collapsed. The thud echoed. Gasps erupted. Security and lawyers rushed forward. Some whispered, "Is he gone?" Others stared, unable to believe what they'd just seen. Outside, protesters caught wind of the news.
Now here's where it gets chilling. Sealed files. That means evidence the public hasn't even seen yet. Recordings. Imagine the ripple effect if those files ever leak. Are we talking one man's downfall, or Hollywood's empire cracking wide open?
Some cheered, calling it justice at last. Others murmured darkly, "This is the beginning of the end." But then came the real shockwave, whispers from inside the prosecution team that his collapse wasn't just from the verdict. Sealed files had been mentioned in court moments earlier, files said to contain names of other Hollywood giants and a secret recording of Cosby confessing to truths that could shatter careers, families, and reputations forever. Across the aisle, Pamela Warner, mother of Malcolm Jamal Warner, sat still, tears streaming, her voice trembling as she whispered, "This is just the beginning." Outside, hashtags exploded. Hashtag Cosby collapse, hashtag truth runs faster, hashtag Hollywood secrets. Millions watched the footage on repeat, their hearts pounding. Because deep down, everyone knew the verdict was not the end. It was the first crack before the real earthquake. The day began like any other in the crowded downtown courthouse, but it ended as one of the most shocking, heartbreaking spectacles in modern courtroom history. Reporters had been lined up since dawn, their cameras aimed at the heavy oak doors as if waiting for a ghost to emerge. Protesters filled the streets outside, their signs flashing words like justice, truth, and never again. Some had been waiting years for this moment. Others had come simply to watch history tear itself open. Inside, the tension felt like static electricity, sharp, buzzing, dangerous. Every seat in the gallery was taken. The scent of old wood, stale coffee, and human anxiety clung to the air. Bill Cosby sat at the defense table, his suit perfectly pressed, his hands folded neatly in.
Notice the silence that followed. That's not just drama. It's a courtroom psychological shift. A single sentence turned a legend into a convict. And whether you cheered or pitied him, history just flipped the script.
In front of him, but his eyes told another story. There was a flicker, a man clinging to the last threads of denial, knowing deep down that the rope was about to snap. The judge entered, and the energy shifted instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the shuffle of papers stopped. All you could hear was the slow, deliberate sound of the judge's footsteps, each one echoing like a countdown to something irreversible. Then it came. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The words sliced through the air. They didn't just land, they detonated. A gasp swept through the courtroom like a wave. One juror instinctively brought their hand to their mouth. A reporter's pen slipped from their fingers, hitting the floor with a faint clink. Somewhere in the back row, someone whispered, "Oh my God." Cosby's head jerked slightly, as if the force of the sentence had struck him physically. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He blinked rapidly, his eyes glassing over. Then his shoulders began to tremble. The lawyer beside him leaned in, whispering urgently, but it was too late. The dam had broken. The color drained from his face until it looked like carved marble. His breathing became shallow, desperate. One hand reached instinctively for the table, the other clutching at his chest. And then, with a sickening, final slump, his body gave out. He hit the floor hard. The sound echoed, a dull, final thud that made even the most hardened court officers flinch. Chaos erupted. "Call 911, someone shouted, though the medics were already rushing forward. Lawyers, security guards, and court staff swarmed around him. A camera flash burst, capturing the image of America's once-beloved TV father sprawled unconscious on the floor, his suit wrinkled, his mouth slightly open. That single photo would flood every news outlet within the hour. Outside, the crowd sensed something had happened. Shouts rippled through the street. Protesters who had been chanting slogans paused, their faces turning toward the courthouse.
Pamela Warner's words cut deeper than the verdict itself. She wasn't just mourning, she was warning. If Cosby's fall is only the beginning, then the bigger question is, who's next?
Steps. A man in the front shouted, "He's down." He collapsed. Immediately, the noise split, half cheering in what they called justice served, the other half murmuring, as if uneasy about the sight of an old man's final dignity stripped away in public. But what the public didn't yet know, what would make this day explode far beyond a courtroom drama, was that Cosby's collapse hadn't come from the sentence alone. Just minutes before the verdict, the prosecution had hinted at a set of sealed files that, according to insiders, contained far more than anyone had expected. Not just additional victims' accounts, but names. Names of other Hollywood icons. And most damning, a secret audio recording, allegedly of Cosby himself, speaking freely about things so explosive, so destructive, that releasing them could end multiple careers, ruin families, and rewrite the public's understanding of Hollywood's darkest secrets. The timing was no accident. Prosecutors had allowed those whispers to surface right before the sentencing, and some believed the shock of realizing those files might one day be made public is what finally shattered Cosby's composure. In the gallery, Pamela Warner, the mother of Malcolm Jamal Warner, sat frozen. Her son had once been a child star on Cosby's famous sitcom, the one that had sold America an image of perfect family life. Now, she stared at the man who had helped shape that illusion, lying crumpled on the floor. Her tears were not the kind that fell gently. They burned, hot with years of quiet rage. She leaned forward slightly, her voice barely audible, but sharp enough to slice through the noise in her own mind. This is the beginning, not the end. Outside, news outlets scrambled to push breaking alerts. The hashtags #Cosby Collapse, #Truth Runs Faster, and #Hollywood Secrets were already trending. Clip after clip of his fall began circulating online, slowed down, replayed, dissected. Millions watched, their jaws tight, their stomachs twisting, some out of sympathy, others out of vindication. And yet, behind all the headlines, the real story was still locked away, waiting for its moment to strike. Because the verdict may have ended Cosby's freedom, but it had just opened the door to a far bigger storm. The courthouse hallways had never felt so suffocating. Paramedics wheeled Bill Cosby out on a stretcher, his head tilted slightly to the side, an oxygen mask covering most of his face. Flashbulbs from the waiting media exploded like fireworks, each one capturing a different angle of his defeat. Some reporters shouted questions, "Mr. Cosby, do you have anything to say?" But he didn't respond. Whether it was unconsciousness or a refusal to speak, no one could tell. Inside the courtroom, the air still carried the static of shock. Some jurors sat frozen in their seats, staring at the now-empty defense table. The prosecution's lead attorney shuffled papers with trembling hands, clearly aware that this was no longer just a legal victory, it was the start of something much bigger. It didn't take long for the whispers to turn into roars. By the time Cosby's stretcher reached the waiting ambulance, social media was already ablaze. A single tweet from a so-called court insider lit the match. Breaking, collapse not just from verdict. Prosecution hinted at sealed files linking other big Hollywood names to same crimes. Audio confession exists. Developing. Within minutes.
Let's pause here. If that audio exists, and prosecutors confirm it, it's not just gossip. In legal strategy, timing is everything. Dropping hints before sentencing. That's pressure. And Cosby, for the first time, cracked under it.
The post had been shared over 50,000 times. Every major outlet scrambled to verify the claim, but the damage or the justice, depending on who you asked, was already done. Cable news switched to wall-to-wall coverage. The footage of Cosby crumpling to the ground played on a loop, each network adding their own dramatic music and slow-motion replay. The collapse became more than a medical emergency. It was now a symbol. Some framed it as the moment a predator's facade finally broke. Others said it was the instant Hollywood's dirtiest secrets began to unravel. Behind closed doors, though, the mood was far darker. Sources inside the district attorney's office revealed that the sealed evidence included transcripts of a private conversation recorded years ago, one in which Cosby allegedly laughed while detailing incidents that had never reached the public. Even more explosive, he mentioned names. Names of other actors, producers, and media executives, some still at the top of their careers. People the public trusted. People who built their reputations on moral authority. The mere suggestion of those names sent a chill through the entertainment industry. Publicists began calling crisis managers. Lawyers for various celebrities reached out quietly to see if their clients were mentioned. It was a scramble not seen since the peak of the hashtag #MeToo revelations. Only this time, the whispers said it would be worse. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, the crowd had transformed into a storm. Supporters of Cosby shouted that the trial was a witch hunt, clashing with survivors' rights activists who saw the collapse as poetic justice. The chants grew louder, angrier, until the police had to set up barricades. Pamela Warner remained inside, refusing to join the media frenzy. She sat alone in the front row, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes fixed on the empty defense table. For her, this wasn't about hashtags or headlines, it was personal. Her son, Malcolm Jamal Warner, had grown up in Cosby's shadow, unknowingly part of a carefully crafted illusion. Watching that illusion shatter in real time was both vindicating and heartbreaking. When a reporter finally approached her in the hallway, she didn't give a long statement. She simply looked into the camera and said, "The truth always finds its way out." Always. Those words went viral within hours, spliced into every news package, shared across every social platform. For many viewers, it felt like the first crack in Hollywood's iron wall of silence. But then came the leak. Late that night, a short, grainy audio clip surfaced online. The voice, unmistakably Cosby's, was calm, almost casual. The content, however, was chilling. He spoke of making sure certain people stayed quiet and mentioned a list of others who wouldn't survive the truth coming out. The clip was only 30 seconds long, but it was enough to set the internet on fire. Suddenly, it wasn't just about Bill Cosby anymore. It was about the list. Who was on it? How high did it go? Entertainment blogs began speculating wildly, dropping hints without naming names. Some users claimed they could recognize one or two of the voices in the background of the clip. Others insisted it was a deepfake, but the DA's office neither confirmed nor denied its authenticity. That silence only fueled the frenzy. Hollywood went into panic mode. PR teams sent out vague, no-comment statements. A few high-profile actors suddenly announced social media breaks. One major studio quietly postponed the release of a film starring an actor rumored to be linked to the case. The public didn't need confirmation. They could smell fear. And through it all, the image of Cosby's collapse played on loop. Not as a moment of weakness, but as the possible tipping point of an industry-wide reckoning. By the next morning, the hashtags had evolved. Hashtag who is on the list joined hashtag Cosby collapse and hashtag Hollywood secrets at the top of trending charts. Live streams popped up with expert panels dissecting every second of the trial, every syllable of the leaked audio. But while the world speculated, the DA's office moved quietly. Warrants were being prepared. Subpoenas drafted. The sealed files, for now, remained locked away, but sources claimed the court could be petitioned to unseal them if public interest demanded it. And public interest had never been louder. For the survivors who had waited decades for justice, it was a bittersweet moment. They had their verdict. They had seen Cosby fall. But the possibility that more predators could be hiding in plain sight kept their wounds raw. And for Pamela Warner, the fight was far from over. She left the courthouse without fanfare, slipping into the back seat of a waiting car. Her phone buzzed with messages from other Hollywood parents, some of whom were suddenly questioning what their children had been exposed to during their careers. In the rearview mirror, she caught one last glimpse of the courthouse.
That laugh, cold, casual. It's not just arrogance. It's evidence of a system built on silence. And here's the uncomfortable part. It forces us to ask, how many powerful figures are still hiding behind that same protection?
House now swarmed with cameras, flashing lights, and shouting voices. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was ground zero for whatever was coming next. Because if the whispers were true, Bill Cosby's collapse was only the first domino. The real storm hadn't even begun. By the third day after the collapse, the world was no longer just watching Bill Cosby, it was watching Hollywood unravel. The list had surfaced. It wasn't officially released by the court, but an anonymous account on the dark web posted a heavily redacted document claimed to be from the sealed files. Even with names blurred, the context was enough for internet sleuths to fill in the blanks. Within hours, certain initials and vague descriptions started matching high-profile actors, beloved talk show hosts, and even one sitting studio executive. And then came the second audio leak, longer, clearer, more devastating. This time, Cosby's voice was deliberate, almost proud. He spoke of decades of protection, of pulling strings in the press, and of friends in powerful places who kept their hands clean while mine got dirty. He laughed when recalling how certain stories were buried, how victims were pressured into silence. The worst part wasn't the words themselves, it was the casual tone, the way he spoke about human lives as if they were disposable storylines in a script he controlled. The reaction was nuclear. Talk shows devoted entire hours to the leaks, inviting psychologists, former prosecutors, and industry insiders to dissect every detail. Social media became a digital battlefield, with users demanding resignations, arrests, and public apologies from anyone even remotely connected. Hashtags multiplied, hashtag Cosby Files, hashtag Hollywood Fallout, hashtag No One Is Safe. Outside the DA's office, survivors gathered in growing numbers, holding candles and photographs. Their silence was louder than any protest chant, a living reminder that behind every headline was a human being who had been silenced for too long. Pamela Warner was there too. She didn't carry a sign. She didn't speak to reporters. She simply stood at the front of the line, a steady presence, her face lit by the flickering glow. For her, this wasn't about internet outrage. It was about finally seeing cracks in a fortress that had seemed indestructible. Meanwhile, inside Hollywood, panic became paranoia. Studios scrambled to review old contracts. Long-buried NDAs were being quietly bought out in hopes of avoiding exposure. A major streaming platform abruptly removed several classic shows from its library, including Cosby's own, claiming licensing issues, but fooling no one. Then came the arrests. In a stunning late-night raid, federal agents escorted a well-known producer from his Beverly Hills mansion in handcuffs. The footage, shot from a neighbor's phone, went viral instantly. Rumors swirled that his name appeared prominently in the unredacted version of the list. By morning, 2 more arrests followed, both industry veterans whose careers spanned decades. It felt less like a news cycle and more like a purge. The public's appetite for truth became insatiable. Viewers who once laughed at these celebrities' jokes or admired their work were now digging into their past interviews, searching for clues they might have missed. Old award show clips were re-uploaded, with users pointing to awkward moments and cryptic jokes that now seemed sinister in hindsight. And still, Cosby remained at the center of it all, a fallen king whose own downfall had triggered an empire-wide collapse. From his hospital bed, sources claimed, he had refused visitors except for his lawyer. One nurse allegedly overheard him muttering, "They think I'm the end, but I'm just the start." Whether it was a warning or a delusion, no one could say. Pamela's quiet resolve soon turned into action. Alongside other families, she began working with advocacy groups to demand that the court unseal the files entirely. The pressure campaign gained momentum fast, with petitions gathering millions of signatures worldwide. If they've protected each other for decades, Pamela told a rally, then it's time we protect the truth. The rally footage hit primetime news. Her words became a rallying cry, printed on signs, chanted at protests, and shared in countless TikTok edits alongside clips of the collapse. The emotional contrast, Cosby's lifeless slump on the courtroom floor against Pamela's fierce, tear-streaked face, became the visual language of a movement. But with the pressure came danger. Anonymous threats began arriving in activists' inboxes. Pamela's own car was vandalized one night. A single word scratched into the paint: stop. Instead of silencing her, it ignited her further. They're scared, she told a reporter, and scared people make mistakes. And mistakes did come. An entertainment lawyer accidentally leaked an internal email thread in which several studio executives discussed containing the situation and making examples of those already exposed to protect the rest. The email was meant to be private. It wasn't. Within hours, it was front-page news, confirming every suspicion the public had about a coordinated cover-up. Now the outrage was absolute. Lawmakers began calling for congressional hearings. Sponsors pulled out of multi-million-dollar deals. Charity organizations cut ties with celebrities whose names had even a whisper of connection to the files. The Cosby collapse had evolved into a cultural earthquake, one that shook not only Hollywood but every industry tied to it. And yet, through all of this, one truth remained. The full list was still sealed. The final blow came unexpectedly. In a leaked recording from inside a closed-door court session, a judge could be heard saying, "Once the motion passes, everything becomes public record. We can't protect them forever." The audio was grainy, but it was enough to send shockwaves through the entertainment world. The clock was now ticking. In living rooms across the country, families sat glued to their screens, waiting for the next name to drop. Every live press conference felt like it could be the one that ended someone's career in real time. And as the anticipation built, one truth echoed louder than any headline, louder than any hashtag. Bill Cosby's collapse had been the spark, but the fire was consuming far more than anyone had imagined. For some, it was justice long overdue. For others, it was the death of the dream they had been sold for decades. But for everyone, it was proof of one thing. In the end, no secret stays buried forever. So now, you've seen it. The collapse. The stretcher. The whispers of a list that could burn an entire industry to the ground. And if you're feeling that knot in your stomach right now, that mix of shock, sadness, and anger, you're not alone. Millions around the world are watching this story unfold in real time, and the truth is, we're only scratching the surface. Bill Cosby's sentencing wasn't the end of a single man's story. It was the opening chapter of a reckoning decades in the making. Every name in those sealed files represents another victim silenced, another truth buried, another life altered forever. And now the world has a choice. Turn away and let the machine keep running, or demand that every secret be dragged into the light. The question is, will you be one of the people who helps keep the pressure on? Will you be one of the